So very quickly, we're absolutely delighted, really delighted to welcome two international stars in our midst this evening. And the first is Sam Lebens. Sam holds a PhD in Logic and Metaphysics from Birkbeck College and is now a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Philosophy of Religion at Rutgers University in New Jersey. Sam's published academic papers on a wide array of issues, from the work of Bertrand Russell to Hasidic philosophy. He spent 6 years in Israeli yeshivot. He has smicha from Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, and he blogs for Haaretz. And I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome him here, and he's going to talk for half an hour on reflections on the primordial Torah and the problems it raises for Orthodox doctrine. And there'll be questions at the end. You may now go.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I just need to be near the computer to control these slides. Thank you, Maureen. Okay, so yeah, what I'd like to do in the next half an hour, and I'm going to talk really super fast in order to say all the things I want to say. Sorry, yeah, I'm going to have to be near the computer, so if people can't see me, sorry, they're not going to budge up. Okay, so what I want to share with you is some of the work I've been doing at Rutgers this semester, but it's been months and months of work. I started at Notre Dame, which is spelt Notre Dame, but it's a different place, because Notre Dame is a cathedral in France, and Notre Dame is a university in Indiana, which I learned when I went there. And I've been, one of the things I've been doing is researching the primordial Torah. So there is an idea that you can find right throughout rabbinic sources. From the earliest times, I mean, there's evidence that it was an idea in Second Temple Judaism, that I'll tell you what the idea is in a minute. You can see it also in the earliest of Midrashim, the pre-Talmudic Midrashim, the Halachic Midrashim, the Sifri. It's in both Talmuds and saturates lots of Jewish thought after both Talmuds. The idea is that before the creation of the earth, there was such a thing as the Torah, and the Torah exists somehow external to and prior to the creation. It's something called the Torah Kadmon, although that's a name it takes on much later in medieval philosophy, but it's there beforehand. And one of the things I'm interested in doing is using the tools of contemporary philosophy to articulate a Jewish theology in much the way that systematic theologians in Christianity still try to articulate systematic theology. And one of the kind of constraints I put on the project is that, and I don't have time to flesh out what I mean by this, so if you want to ask about it at the end, do. One of the constraints I put on the project is that the ideas that I come up with have to be somehow grounded in the textual tradition. It's legitimate for me to massage the texts a lot and maybe not always be all that accurate in terms of capturing original intent, but and we can talk about whether that's intellectually honest or not maybe at the end. But it's important to me that the ideas that I come up with somehow arise out of an honest engagement with the texts and with kind of Jewish history. And I can't just... Okay. So that's ultimately going to be one of the reasons why we can't just say, oh, there's no such thing as the Torah Kadmon if it gets difficult. For instance, there were rabbis who believed that I mean, most of us believe, I imagine, in this room, that there's no such thing as demons. And yet the Talmud is saturated with a great deal of demonology. But it's not so easy just to get rid of demons if the Talmud talks about demons all the time. So there's two things you need to do, I think, if you want to be from a Jew who doesn't believe in demons. You need to have a really compelling reason why you don't believe in demons. And you then need to have some convincing story as to why it seems like the Talmud commits us to demons. And in order to be so egregiously violent with the texts that seem to talk about demons and pretend that they don't talk about demons, you need to have a really good reason to do that. And I think we do, because demons don't exist. I don't think we have a really compelling reason to say the Torah Kadmon doesn't exist. We don't have a really compelling reason to say it doesn't exist. And if you wanted to say it doesn't exist, you're then going to have to give an account of what this literature that seems to be talking about it is really for, what it's a metaphor for. Okay, so one of the problems, that is Rabbi Yehuda ben Barzilai, who's one of the few medieval commentators who had a problem with the notion of a Torah canon, a philosophical problem. Like I said, if you've got overwhelming problems with it, then there might be a reason to engage in a kind of textual violence motivated by a really good reason. Rabbi Yehuda ben Barzilai said it's not clear to us how the Torah could be created prior to the existence of the world. Any created thing requires space to be present. So if space had not been created, where would the Torah be? It just doesn't make sense to talk about something existing, especially a book, before creation. I just don't find this a compelling reason not to believe that it exists. Where is Moby Dick? Moby Dick is a book, and that book exists, but it's not located in space in any easy way to define. It might be located where all of its copies are. What happens if all of its copies are burnt, but somebody remembers it word for word and then writes it down again? Did it stop existing for a minute before it... I mean, I don't have time to go into this part of my research now, but I have a paper coming out in philosophical studies about the ontology of literary works, and it's not clear to me that they need to exist in space. Don't think it's a problem. Maybe another problem is so when was it created? We have the where issue I'm not really worried about. When was it created? So the Midrash on Psalm says God created the Torah 974 generations before the world was created. Then 26 generations from the creation of the world until Moshe, the leader of the prophets, through whom the Torah was given. This is a very bizarre notion, 974 generations before the creation, because if you think time itself was created, what do you mean generations before the creation? Bereshit Rabbah says 6 things preceded the creation of the universe. Some of them were, typos again. Some of them were created at that point, and some of them were conceived of but not yet created. The throne and the Torah and the throne of glory were actually created before the creation, whatever that means. The forefathers, Israel, the temple, and the name of the Messiah were conceived of before the creation, but not yet created. Really weird stuff going on there. Don't know exactly how to parse it, but certainly it seems to me that if you want to talk about generations before the creation of time, you're probably engaging in some sort of metaphor. And this is where I want to turn to the Christians to give us some help. This guy here is called Origen. He was a Christian a long time ago, one of the patristic thinkers, and he came up with this notion. Okay, so if you're a Christian, you believe that God has 3 parts: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Am I allowed to say that in here? That the Rabbi, the Shul, is here. Right? Am I captain? You okay with me talking about this? Okay, good. Okay, so they... Yeah, sorry, I should have asked beforehand. Okay, so the thing is, you'd normally think that the father creates the son in some sense, right? That a parent has some role in generating the child. You'd think that would be part of the relationship between the father and the son, but the problem is, there's lots of problems, Christianity really being the problem, but the problem here would be that the father needs to be identical to the son, which is weird, okay, but let's forget about that problem. Another problem is that they're both co-eternal, right? The son, even before Jesus was born, the human flesh, the son, okay, there was this thing called the son. God was eternally tripartite according to the Trinitarians. So when was, you can tell I've spent some time in the Catholic University, right? I'm kind of talking about all of this stuff. But it's useful, it's really useful. I think it's useful. Okay, so they have this question, well, when was the Son created from the Father? When was he generated from the Father? So Maurice Wilde explains, the generation was the natural term to use to describe the relation between the first 2 persons of the Trinity. The Father generates the Son. The Son is somehow dependent upon the Father. Nevertheless, certain special modifications were obviously required. One of the most important of such modifications was the removal of the idea of temporal secondariness. The Son didn't come second in time, which would normally be associated with the Son as generated. This modification was achieved by affirming generation to be an eternal process rather than a temporal event. The idea is the Father is constantly generating the Son, and the Son is constantly being generated. As was put by G.L. Prestige, another Christian theologian, the begetting of the Son, this is all Origen's idea, the idea of eternal generation, that's why I have this picture of him. The begetting of the Son was not an event in time, but represents an eternal process within the eternal being of God, no less actual at this moment than it was before the worlds were made. So this is what I want to say about the Torah Kadmon. I'm just using Prestige's terminology, borrowed from Origen. God's creation of the Torah Kadmon was not an event in time, but represents an eternal process between a timeless God and his timeless Torah, no less actual at this moment than it was before the worlds were made. Sam Lebens. Okay, isn't that cool? I did that. Yeah. Okay. So this leads us to a very late midrash, Shemot Rabbah, a post-Christian midrash, so you can read into that what you will. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to Israel, "I sold you my Torah. It's as if I was sold alongside her. It can be compared to a king who had an only daughter. One of the other kings requested to take her to his land and marry her. The father king said, 'My daughter, whose hand I have given to you in marriage,'" I'm sorry about all the patriarchy here, especially after the really awesome panel yesterday on feminism and orthodoxy. But I think there's something beautiful to take away from this midrash nonetheless. The father king said, "My daughter, whose hand I have given to you in marriage, is my only daughter. I can't allow you to take her away from me, but I also can't tell you not to take her with you because she's your wife. Rather, do me this favour. Everywhere you go, make for me a room so I can live with you. Since I cannot let my daughter go," so that like the father-in-law says to the son-in-law, "Please just build like a guest room wherever you go because I can't bear to be away from my daughter." So said the Holy One, blessed be he, to Israel, "I gave to you my Torah. I can't allow you to take her away from me, and I can't tell you not to take her. Rather, everywhere you go, one house make for me, so that I can live among you." Right? The Torah is God's daughter. Right? So I really think, and you can certainly sketch the history from Second Temple Judaism times, from Philo. In Christian theology, God's wisdom, the Logos, the Son, is identical to God somehow, and it also becomes incarnate in Jesus. In Jewish theology, God's wisdom isn't identical to God. It's not God, it's his wisdom, right? Because we don't have the whole Trinity thing. But his wisdom becomes incarnate in the Torah, in Scripture. And just like the Christians would call Jesus and the Logos the Son of God, we have this tradition of calling the Torah God's daughter. Okay? So I think that you could basically, that prelim, which is eaten into too much of the time that I really wanted to talk about, is supposed to demonstrate that the metaphysical problems you might have with thinking such a thing exists, like where does it exist, when does it exist, are not overwhelming problems. And if loads of Jewish sources seem to commit to the existence of this thing, we don't have an overwhelming philosophical reason to say no, it can't exist, in the way that you might vis-a-vis demons. Okay. So now the question is, it's clear from the texts that the Pentateuch and perhaps the oral law, so the Chumash and the Torah Sheba'al Peh, are in some integral way related to this Torah Kadmon, right? So the question is, what is the relationship between the content of the Torah Kadmon and our primary focus right now is going to be the Chumash. And the first theory is what I'm calling the Pentateuchal theory, because the idea is there's a lexical identity. Okay? The Torah Kadmon just is the Chumash. It's the same words in the same order. Okay. There are reasons for thinking this. There's all sorts of